Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, David?
I'm doing good.
It's Tommy and Eric from the Brothers Mysterium here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, it should be cool. We're excited as well. So we're joined now by David L Sloan, author and expert on Robert the Doll. David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, this is something I've been looking forward to.
Us as well, definitely. And my first question, I kind of want to get it out of the way just to start it off. There's a lot of talk that Chucky the doll, the Chucky franchise, is all based on Robert. Can you address that, confirm that, or deny that rumor?
Yeah, that's completely not true. Um, and it's something that's kind of gone into culture, and it's spread across the internet because it makes a great story.
Right.
But you can actually find interviews with the people who are responsible for the whole Child's Play franchise, and they were inspired by Cabbage Patch Kids and the My Buddy dolls.
Ah,
So it all started off with that, and but even before that, they had Talking Tina on the Twilight Zone. The little doll that was going to kill everybody.
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Yeah, I remember that one.
so it's been within our culture. There's different things that influence it. Um, but no, Robert was not the inspiration for Chucky.
Okay, I'm glad we kind of got that out of the way, got to the truth. So now let's delve into Robert and let's start at the beginning. I've heard Robert is over 100 years old. Could you tell us where Robert was made and when and just the creation of the physical doll?
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting. There was so much that wasn't known about Robert for a long time. So people were going on really what had become legends. But the cool thing about the legends is they're based on fact. A lot of times what we find out is truth is even stranger. But Robert was not created by an angry servant.
Right.
Uh, he was actually made in Germany at the Steiff Company. And the Steiff Company, they're the ones who are responsible for inventing the teddy bear.
Oh, wow.
Now, nobody knew this because their signature trademark is a button in the ear. And Robert was missing one of his ears. It's been restored more recently. But that's why nobody could identify him. He had no identifying marks. There's definitely something inside of the doll. I think the servant is responsible for the actual spirit of Robert. But the doll itself was made in Germany.
Very cool. And now let's kind of talk about the doll's owners, because that's definitely a big part of the history of Robert. So could you take us through who owned the dolls at what time?
Yeah, the doll was given as a gift to a little boy in Key West. His name was Robert Eugene Otto. Now, when he got the doll, they say that he gave the name Robert to the doll. He gave his own first name to the doll, and he went by his middle name for the rest of his life. And he became bizarrely attached to the doll. His mother probably gave it to him, or his parents gave it to him. With the Otto name, that's where the German tie-in comes in. So I think his mother brought the doll back. The doll was originally dressed as a clown. He wears a sailor suit now. And the doll, just to give you an idea, he stands about 4 feet tall, and he's stuffed with straw. He's covered in fabric. He almost looks like a burn victim, but that's from partly his age, partly from some termite damage to his face.
Right.
But when Gene got him, he just developed this bizarre attraction. And they spent all their time together. And they'd play in the room together. The parents would hear two different voices. And when they went in to check on it, they'd only see little Gene. And whenever he got in trouble, he'd say, "I didn't do it, Robert did it." He'd blame the doll.
Wow. Came to young Gene already with some sort of a presence in it, correct?
Well, I think the doll arrived probably, what I believe now is that in the initial years, it might have just been a doll.
Right.
The thing now is a good time to talk about the servant thing. I've been researching the doll for 20 years. I couldn't find any records of servants with the Otto family. But then I found out about a man who was a servant for Jean's grandfather. And his name was William Abbott. And William Abbott was, he was really close with the family. He was almost part of the family. So when Jean's grandfather died, Jean's father hired William to work at his pharmacy. Now, there was a long string of doctors in this family. So doctors made their money with the pharmacy, and right across from the house that Jean grew up in, that's where the pharmacy was, William came to work there. And he had a wife, whose name was Emmeline. And I was digging through different census records trying to find out more about her. And in 1900, she showed no children. In 1910, she showed one child deceased.
Huh.
So you figure Robert arrived around 1904. Sometime between 1900 and 1910, Emmeline had a child and the child died.
Right.
Now, if her child was sick or dying, where would she have taken the child? To the doctor's house, right?
Sure, yeah.
So Jean's father being a doctor, I think what happened is the Abbott child was brought there, and I think the Abbott child died inside the artist house. And I think its spirit entered this doll.
Oh, wow. Makes sense.
And I believe Jean was talking not to a doll. I think he could see the spirit of that little kid. Because you'll hear about Jean going through his entire life and always having that connection with the doll, even in his later years.
Right.
And Jean was an artist. He was a creative type. I think he maybe never lost that ability to see spirits. And maybe he wasn't as crazy as everybody thought. But maybe he had just made a friend of this with the ghost of this little boy who died.
Interesting.
Very cool. Yeah, and interesting, as you pointed out through your research, it's not like he was a kid with an active imagination. As you said, it kind of remained with him, throughout his life, the connection to that doll.
Yeah, and he was definitely a creative type. He was a little bit eccentric, some would say. He was an artist, or he became an artist. And it's interesting, he went off to France to work in his art. And he was there in the 20s. At the same time, Hemingway was there. That's where he met his wife. And I kind of think he married her more for her money. But she was in for quite a shock when they came back to Key West. They moved back to Key West when they were both in their early 40s, and that's when she discovered the doll.
And is she the one who had some experiences with the doll, like constantly moving and hearing giggling and stuff like that?
There's a lot of people who have encountered that. What we know about Ann Otto, she didn't care for the doll. I talked to one of her really good friends, the guy who lived across the street, and he told me that after Jean had passed away, and this was 1974, Jean was 74 years old, Jean's will wrote Anne out of ownership of pretty much the house, all of their antiques, everything. So she was pretty bitter about that.
Wow, that's very interesting.
I think this is what caused, a lot of people say he was very cruel to her. I don't think there was physical abuse. I think at the end he just wrote her out, and she had given up most of her life to be the artist's wife.
Right.
That caused a lot of strife there. But I talked to this guy, and he doesn't like talking about the doll. He wishes he had burned the doll. He actually bought the house from Anne. I asked him, I said, I was asking mainly about Anne and Jean, trying to get more of a picture of what they were like. And when he got to the part about Jean dying and Anne preparing to move, he said there was a cedar chest on the second floor, and Robert was inside the chest. And I asked him, I said, did Anne say anything about it? And he said, oh yeah, she said, I hate that damn doll. It was his only friend. Of course, he never could make any friends of his own.
Wow, very creepy.
So we know that Anne didn't like the doll. That confirms so many of the stories. But then it was really after Anne left the house. She moved up to Boston with her family. And a few different people owned it. And it was people like a plumber would be in there doing some work. And he saw the doll move from side to side. And he heard the doll giggle. there were a couple of guys who rented the place, and I talked to them probably 15 years ago. And they said they'd always hear someone moving around upstairs. And if they went to check it out, they'd find the doll in a different location. But they really thought that they were playing tricks on each other,
Right. Right, for sure.
And then eventually, the weird things happened where they said, okay, this is a little too strange. So it was mainly after the Ottos were both gone that everybody else started seeing what Robert was up to.
And I kind of recall a story, and it may or may not be true, where somebody was like, found the doll with scissors or a knife or something like that. Is that a true account?
No, that's most likely a fabrication. And, I don't know every single encounter that happened with Robert.
Right.
But that's not really fitting. And Robert takes this incredible hold on people. And some of those people believe they have these things happen. There's one guy who rented the house, and he wrote almost a manifesto about how Robert had given him yellow fever and locked him in the attic for nearly 30 days.
Oh, my gosh.
How many days?
30.
Now, whether that happened or not, who's to say? But this guy believed it happened. He was in the house with the doll. So Robert does strange things, and I've talked to hundreds of people over the years who have had things happen. If you go up to the museum where Robert is now, there's letters all over the walls of people writing to ask forgiveness from Robert. And I think some of them are crazy.
Right.
And then you see some of these things, and you see the trends, and you see the same things happening over and over again, and you say, wow, there's something to this.
Right.
And I'll take things as a skeptic, but I've had so many weird things happen with Robert. I thought that I was insane at one point. I mean, I went and I had scans done to make sure that I didn't have a tumor.
And did you witness what a lot of people say, which is like his facial expressions changing and things like that?
Yeah, people talk about the doll moving. The more frequent things, people say when a doll moves, they expect him standing up and doing a little jig, something like that. And that's not normally the case. More often, someone will look at the doll, and they'll feel like they're in a museum with an inanimate object. And when something happens that triggers him or that sparks him, and his eyes take on a gleam, it's almost as if he comes alive, and you can feel that you're not alone in that room with him.
Right.
And it's something you really just need to experience. And when it happens, there's no doubt that that doll is alive. And I believe that gives the sense that he moved because there is such a dramatic change.
Mm-hmm.
But then we don't want to discount the fact that a couple months ago, there was a group of people up there, and there was a drunk lady who was taunting Robert. And there were about 30 people gathered around the doll. Robert holds a little lion. They call him Leo the Lion. He's a little stuffed doll. Robert threw this doll towards the lady, and he's locked in a cage.
Right.
But the doll hit the case. It was as if he was throwing it right at her.
Right, and there's 30 people around to witness it too, so that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So that's a definite case of him moving, and that lends credence to the stories. There was this is going back shortly after Robert was put on display. There was a lady who was the curator at the museum. It's the Fort East Martello Museum. It's where he's located. And she came in, and there was a little desk. She was leaning over, checking the sign-in book from the previous day. And she felt somebody come up behind her and give her like a little tap just above her butt. And she finishes. She kind of said, okay, just a second. She looked at the rest of the names, and then she turned around. She said she saw Robert back into his case.
Wow.
Now, she took off. She left. She ran screaming out of the museum. And one of the guys doing maintenance there, he was trying to find out what was wrong with her. He thought she had lost a member of her family or something.
Right.
And she was, a quarter of a mile away by the time he caught up with her. When he touched her shoulder, like, hey, wait, she was so freaked out, she turned around, scratched him across the face.
Oh, wow.
She told him what happened. She would not go back near there. She left her bike there. She didn't want anything. She ended up moving out to California.
So she literally left the state. She was so freaked out.
Oh, safe.
Yeah, Robert made a big impact on her. So, you hear these stories, and there's enough individual accounts, that they make me a believer.
Okay. I had heard rumors, and maybe it's one of those incidents, that now Robert is almost like anchored or kind of shackled inside of the case with twine or something around his ankle. Is that true? Because I heard, like you said, other people had seen him moving, and there was something about somebody even saw like dust footprints. Can you talk about that's true at all?
Yeah, during the incident where he had touched the curator there, the museum's open air, so it's very dusty, man. It's an old Civil War fort. So there usually was a pretty good layer of dust on the floor. And there was dirt on the bottom of Robert's feet at that time. And he had recently been cleaned, so the bottoms of his feet were very clean.
Wow. So it definitely makes you wonder.
Yeah, and what you'll find now, when you look at him up at the museum, you'll see a piece of filament or fishing line across his waist.
Oh, okay.
And that's keeping him in his chair. Because, they have an alarm system underneath him. He's in a large acrylic case. And for them to take the top off of that, they have to contact the alarm company, get them to turn off the alarms, go through a certain protocol of procedures, and then have a couple of people to lift everything. Plus, he's 100 years old plus. So they don't want to be going in there a lot.
Right.
And yet, he was moving around enough that they felt the need to put that.
That is insane, to be honest.
Yeah.
So let me get to you here. What first sparked your interest in Robert the Doll, and then captivated you so much you decided to do all this research and write a book about him?
I've always been into ghosts, and I quit my corporate job. I used to manage cruise ships and moved to Key West to start a ghost tour. And I was following up on different leads, and there had been an article about the ghost of Ann Otto, and it was the wife of Gene Otto.
Right.
So I went to the artist house. That's what they call the home where he grew up. And I talked to the owner. It was a guy named Daryl. And I said, hey, I'm starting a ghost tour in town. I'm here to talk to you about your ghost. He said, oh, you want to hear about Robert? I said, no, I'm here to talk to you about Ann. Who's Robert? He said, oh, Robert's a doll. He's a haunted doll. I thought that this guy is crazy.
Right, sure.
Yeah, so he told me a little bit about Robert. He says, do you want to see the room where Robert lives? I said, yeah, sure. And I said that the phone flew off the hook. And it stretched out, it's one of those a little landline phone, and the cord just stretched out. And Daryl looked over it like it was nothing, and he goes, come on, let's go upstairs. We start walking. A bookcase, the door to it opened up and almost blocked me from going up. And then we went up the stairs, and it's this great old Victorian house. And on the second floor, all the way towards the back of the house, there's a small, deep staircase that goes up towards the attic. When you get to the top of the attic, there's a little hatch that you push open. And we go up, and I step inside. It was very surreal. The place looked like someone was expecting to have a little key party with a bunch of kids. Robert was no longer in the room, but the furniture was still there. And there was like a little wooden bench that was like a two-seater.
Right.
A very, very small table, another little chair, just like the one that Robert sits in at the museum. And some other little Robert-sized things. And so that has a little creep factor to it.
Absolutely.
What happened next, I was just overcome with this negative heat energy. And I'm not talking about being up in an attic, that kind of heat.
Right.
This room was sectioned off from the rest of the attic. So it was like a certain area just for Robert. And I was overwhelmed by this feeling, and I felt like I was going to throw up if I didn't get out of there.
Oh, geez, very powerful feeling.
So I thanked Daryl for showing me the room, and I left. Took my notes and told him I'd be back in contact with him. And then I started making arrangements to go see Robert at the museum. He wasn't on display at this time. This was back in '96. Robert was kept up in the back, and none of the employees wanted to be the ones to bring him out because they all knew there was something weird about him.
That's cool.
And eventually the curator there, her name is Stacy, she said, "Oh yeah, you can come see Robert. Come at this time." And I went, and I was in one of the case baits there, or it's an old fort, so it's broken up into sections. The old red brick. And I'm alone in the room. She goes back and she goes to storage, and she brings out this little chair with Robert sitting in it. And she's talking to Robert, and she says, "Hey, Robert, this is David. He's starting up a ghost tour in town. He wanted to come and say hello to you and take some photographs. I hope you'll be nice to him." And again, I think, okay, another crazy person.
Yeah, that's definitely odd.
And then she sat Robert down on his table on the chair, and she said, "Let me know if you need anything. I'll be in my office." And she left. So I'm alone in the room with Robert, and I started taking some photographs. And then I said, okay, I'm going to get a photograph without his hat. He wears the little sailor hat. So I lean over to grab his hat. And I swear to you, the doll moved. He looked at me like, "Don't you dare touch my hat."
Wow.
That same exact negative heat energy that I felt upstairs in this former room, I tried to take some photographs to show the difference in how he looked. Boom, boom, boom. 3 shots, none of them came out. Okay? I set the camera down for a second, see what's wrong with it. Boom, boom, boom. It goes off 3 times. I pick it up again because it's now working. I try to take another shot. Nothing. So
Unbelievable.
That's when he was like that, yeah. And I mean, he knew very well what was going on. But that's the first time that convinced me. I said, okay, well, there's something to this doll. And then it's kind of been, one of my passions. I've always wanted to find out, okay, what's the truth? Because there's so many legends out there about Robert, and I really wanted to get to the bottom of them. Because there's no denying there's something in that doll.
Right.
And I just wanted to know what.
And so on that note, first of all, I'm glad you did spend the time to, even just in this interview, you've already been able to sort of dispel some of the negative rumors and give us the truth, which we're appreciative of. Do you think Robert is evil or malicious? Because like you said, everybody's very respectful of him. They even introduced you, "Hey, Robert, please behave." If you kind of mess with him, you felt like the negative heat energy. People that come to the museum and kind of mock him and stuff have bad luck and end up writing apology letters. Do you think there's an evil, malicious side to the spirit in Robert?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is multiple spirits. And I'm pretty convinced now that Robert is that innocent little boy. The other ones that are there, I believe Gene Otto is there sometimes. And I think Gene's protective to a degree. I don't think he's one of the more active. But then there's 2 other entities, and I'm not sure who they are. But these are the ones that seem to thrive off of the negativity.
Okay.
Robert used to be called the Enchanted Doll. And then somewhere along the lines, people started calling him the Demon Doll. And people look for that evil. They say a doll, it can't be haunted with a nice ghost. It's got to be a bad one. So there's a lot of people looking for that. And what I've found with the whole spirit world, I think there's spirits looking for energy, and they'll fill in whatever need there is. So I think there's other spirits that have come down there, and they're latching on to these people who are looking for negative. I think they're giving it to them. I think these are the ones that follow people home. I think these are the ones that cause people problems. When they joke around, when they give the finger to the casemate, when they do any of those things, I think these ones are there saying, cool, let's thrive on this energy.
Right, yeah, they're sort of inviting that negative energy in with their actions.
Yeah, so I think that's what it is. I don't think Now, when people say, "Hey, I went to visit Robert and this happened," yeah, that stuff's happening. I think though the actual spirit of Robert, the child, that it's a innocent child.
Right. And you said something interesting there about different spirits being in the doll. What is it about dolls, in your opinion, that, especially older dolls, sort of creep people out? And, like you said, nobody ever says this is a good haunted doll. It's always evil, creepy, no matter how cute the doll is. There's just something about dolls that kind of upsets people. What do you think that is?
Yeah, there's a whole theory out there. It's called the uncanny theory, and it talks about how close things look to the human form as to how much they, I guess you could say, repel us. Where you could look at a robot, and the robot's not too close to humans, so it's like, yeah, that's okay. But then the more realistic it starts becoming, the more it can kind of repel us. So as it takes on those human characteristics, it's just our nature, and it's stuff that Freud studied. There's a whole scale of how things will work. But the other thing to take into consideration, if a spirit no longer has the shell that it used to live in, it's going to go towards something that looks familiar, right?
Right, yeah, that makes sense. It's humanoid for sure.
And another theory that I have about Robert, and this is only a theory at this time, but when that little kid died, if it happened the way I believe it did, when it leaves its own body, you got to realize this was a time when things were definitely not equal between black families and white families
right,
in
definitely.
Key West. So if this was I think this was either a mulatto child or a black child, but there's also the possibility when it left its shell that it said, "Hey, look, there's a white shell waiting for me."
Oh, interesting point.
And that's simply a theory. It's I go through so many scenarios trying to figure out what the truth is, but I'm pretty much convinced about it being the child of Emmeline Abbott. I'll tell you something really cool that happened. The night that I did the Coast to Coast interview,
right,
I was alone with Robert up at the museum, and the interview started at 1:00 in the morning here in Key West time. And being alone in the fort with Robert's pretty interesting. And I've had good times with Robert. I've had bad times. I try to be very respectful. There's this old horse-drawn hearse right across from where he is. There's a long rail. So I had some notes lined up there. It's, some things so I could reference and make sure I was getting everything correct.
right.
But it meant having my back to Robert. So with the ghost hunt, we use different things. And there's one trigger device I use, and it's a doll that looks like Annabelle, but it has a K2 meter built into it, and her head will light up or her hands will light up when there's a lot of electromagnetic activity.
Right.
I had gone around Robert's casemate, and there was nothing really happening. And then I set her down on the rail, and I said, "Listen, Robert, I'm going to have my back to you. If you need me for anything, or if you don't like anything I'm saying, just go over and touch her hand. She'll light up, and I'll know to change the subject." Because Robert's been very clear. There's things that I could not put in the book. So when I did that, the interview hadn't even started, and I was walking over, and the doll started lighting. I said, "Is that you, Robert?" Boom, boom. It lit up for yes. And I said, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" And it blinked as if that was okay. And I started asking questions about my theory about Emmeline Abbott being the mother of the child and who the child was. And I asked probably 10 or 12 questions, and it confirmed all of them.
Oh, wow.
And then it got tired and stopped. The rest of the interview, and this was a 2-hour segment, the doll did not blink once.
Wow. That is...
Which for me is nice because, maybe there was some weird electromagnetic field that just happened to be pulsing through at that point in time.
Right.
there are possibilities like this. I try to rule them out. The fact that we got nothing the whole rest of the time I was there, that lended a lot of credibility to it for me.
Yeah, for sure. And it speaks to like the level of trust and the relationship that you have with Robert, where, he's willing to speak to you, answer your questions, and then during a live episode kind of goes quiet there, doesn't want to share.
Yeah. And I had some really bad times with Robert. I mean, the book, I think it took me, I researched for nearly 20 years, but the writing process, 4 or 5 years, and I had to stop several times. I lost several hard drives on my computer, and the computer would lock up and just die at the same point every time. It was when I was trying to write this certain thing about the doll.
Right.
And, by the third time, I had backups everywhere. I had a paid subscription service in Texas where every keystroke was registered. So I could not lose this manuscript again. And I lost it again. And when they sent me a drive that had everything, it had everything except the book. And to me, that's impossible.
Right, that's more than a coincidence.
Wow, I thought it at home.
Right.
There really isn't any way for that to happen, but it did.
Wow. Yeah, there definitely something else was at play for that to happen so many times at the same exact point in your writing process.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I had some things. I got pulled out of my bed. I had weird things happen with electricity around my house. I had a lot of things. It was pretty much Robert. It was either Robert or those entities with Robert saying, "Do not put this stuff in the book."
Right. Everybody has their secrets, even Robert.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've definitely learned to respect them.
And do you think Robert is currently happy now being on display in that case? Do you ever get the feeling that Robert wants to come out, wants to, play with somebody, be a little more active? Or what do you think is the current mindset, if you will?
There seems to be a little bit of sadness there. And it used to be, different mediums and psychics would visit him and say that he wanted to go back home. He wanted to go back to the artist house. Since he's been out on display, that seemed to change a lot. When he was locked up, there was that sadness. But now he's on display, and I think some of the people visiting him, it's great. When it's too many people with the wrong impressions, the people who try to bring up the negative aspects.
Right.
I don't think he really has time for that. I think that gets to him. And you got to figure, how's a little 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy going to respond to different things?
Right.
He's probably a little bit lonely. But one of the cool things, the museum's under the care of the Key West Art and Historical Society, and the people there, they really care about him. They're required to treat him as an artifact and ensure his preservation and the things like that. But they do treat him more as part of the family. You'll find the people who work at the museum, they talk to Robert. There's people who very much watch out and try to protect him. You get a lot of TV shows that want to come down there and do a feature on Robert. But they can usually tell from the start, are you here to do a real story about Robert, or are you here to do an evil doll story?
Right, exactly. Yeah, to protect him from the motives of people trying to cash in on his false reputation there, yeah.
Yeah, so they really do try to look out for him. And there's people in town, there's a lot of people who go visit Robert on a regular basis and talk to him, relate to him in their way with what they think he needs.
Very cool. Good to know he's being taken care of and watched after. You had mentioned you had a device that looked like Annabelle the doll. Have you ever looked into or researched Annabelle, and probably the only other really famous haunted doll I could think of? Have you ever looked into Annabelle or any other dolls for that matter?
A little bit. Whenever articles come up there was a cool video going around recently with a haunted puppet. It was like a priest puppet or something.
Oh, wow.
And uh, but with any of these things, I think without being there and being around it, it's so difficult to gauge what the truth is. I think with any haunted doll, because if you look at all the haunted dolls for sale on eBay,
Right.
I don't think there's that many haunted dolls in the world that people are looking to sell.
Right, exactly.
So people know that there's an attraction to haunted dolls, and there's people who will use them unscrupulously. There's a lot of people now, they'll see that Robert's in Louisiana, that he's getting hundreds of visitors a day, and they say, oh, I can make money if I had a haunted doll.
Right, of course.
So there's that element. There's definitely that element there. So when I look into them, I do it out of curiosity to see what people say about them. And I know that there are a lot of objects that aren't dolls that are haunted. I've got like a half dozen myself that I've encountered, because I'll do clearings in people's houses and get rid of whatever spirits are bothering them.
Right.
And sometimes it's an object, and they'll say, "Okay, get it out of here." And so I keep them at a bar downtown. I keep them locked up in a case. I don't want them in my house.
Right, smart man.
Because there is some weird things. But I'm a firm believer that energy can travel through different things, and I believe inanimate objects can have spirit attachment. I think you just have to look at motives a lot of times.
Right, yeah, for sure. You had mentioned that especially young Gene would be talking and people would hear two different voices. Have you ever heard a voice come from Robert, or have other people sort of in more recent times ever heard the voice, what it sounded like, or anything to do with an audible?
There's people who talk about giggling. That's the most common report around Robert right now. And it happens at the museum, and it happens to some people at home. One of the letters that came in, a lady talked about being locked in her basement. She went down, the door was locked behind her, the lights were turned off, and then she heard giggling right around her. And she started beating on the door furiously, waiting for her husband to open it. And he said, "Oh, you must have locked it accidentally behind yourself." And she said, "I lived in the house 30 years. I've never accidentally locked it up."
Right.
Something really cool that just recently happened. I got a Facebook message from a lady. She went up with her family to see Robert. And her son's autistic. Big fan of Robert. When they went around the doll, they took several pictures of Robert. They asked his permission, and everything was cool. The rest of the family left. They were all going to go back out to their car. And the lady said to her son, she goes, "Oh, we took pictures of Robert, but we didn't get one of you with Robert." He said, "Robert, would that be okay if I got a picture of the two of you together?" She snapped this photograph. There's a silhouette of a small child stepping out of the case right behind Boy.
Wow.
It's the coolest thing. She just said that to me recently, and it's things like that that are so cool. Because I've been there, and I've been there with mediums where, I'm around different haunted places enough that I kind of know their energies.
Right.
And I've been there when this little boy climbs out of the case, and I've felt him. It's almost like I've been able to visualize him. But when I was up there with Beth Rooney, who's a local medium, she said, "He just came out of the case. He's over here. He's hugging my leg," and that's exactly what I've seen. So it's really cool. So there is that innocent little boy there that will step out of that case sometimes to people.
Right. Cool. And it's cool to know. Yeah, he's not trapped in a doll's body. It's just sort of his new home, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's the vessel he feels comfortable with.
Right. Just curious, have you ever taken any thermal photos of Robert or anything to see if there's heat signatures or anything using your paranormal investigative tools to try to get different looks and angles?
I've not. I've always considered myself more of a ghost hunter than a paranormal investigator. So I like going there and encouraging the spirits to do things where I can encounter it. But there are people who do like the investigative side of things. There's a guy, you've probably heard of Joshua Warren.
Yep.
He was down here, and I know he put I think he ran some ultraviolet across Robert and found what he believed to be blood on the sailor suit, and he thought that could have been used in some type of ritual.
Oh, that's
there's another team down here, and they do some pretty cool stuff. They went up, and they were using the aura cameras to take pictures of Robert, and they detected an aura around the doll. And I think they've got their results posted on YouTube somewhere, so you can probably just search for Robert and aura.
cool.
But they also had, are you familiar with that Kinect technology?
Yes.
Where,
yep, you get like the stick figure almost of...
yeah,
Yeah.
it picks up the motion. It picks up the human form that's moving.
Right.
One of the investigators down here, her and her team went up, and they were using that. And it was so cool because it was around Robert and somebody was staying in the back. And remember those two entities that I believe are hanging around that aren't really the good ones?
Yep.
I've always had this perception of them as being very tall. I mean, like, they're very large entities. And sure enough, when someone's sitting there, the box started picking up a figure, and it was a very tall figure. It was exactly the size that we suspected.
Oh, wow.
I think that's on YouTube somewhere, too.
Very cool. And then, kind of in closing, what are your thoughts on the haunted doll phrase? Do you think that that's applicable? Is it sort of sensationalizing Robert and what's happening? What do you think?
I don't think it's sensationalizing it. I think people should experience Robert for themselves and make their own decisions. But I've had enough things happen. I'm 100% convinced that he's a haunted doll.
Very cool. Awesome. And where can people go to either sign up for your ghost tours or go to purchase your book, Robert the Doll?
The book's on Amazon. All of my books about the different ghosts in Key West are available on Amazon. And you can also, if people want to get an autographed copy, they can go to robertdidit.com, and that comes directly through me.
Awesome.
If people want a ghost hunt, it is keywestghosthunt.com.
Very cool. David, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your personal stories and all the history of Robert the Doll with us. We really appreciate it.
It's been great talking with you. I really love what you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I appreciate you guys having me on.